4 women received unlimited credit cards from the city mayor. 3 of them went straight to the mall. The 4th one never received a card at all. She found one on the ground outside a boutique, dropped by one of the other 3 women who had been too busy arguing on the phone to notice it fall from her bag. The woman who found it was named Ruth Hayward. She was 26 years old. She lived at the edge of Harlow, a mid-sized city that had opinions about everyone and kept them loudly in a one-room flat above a hardware store, with a neighbor who played music too loud and a landlord who fixed nothing. The town called her the quiet one, the strange one, the woman who didn't fit. She picked the card up off the pavement, turned it over in her hands, and read the name embossed on it. Mayor Daniel Westbrook. She stood on that pavement for a long time, and what she did next, what Ruth Hayward chose to do with a card that was never meant for her, with money that could have changed her entire personal situation, is what this story is actually about. Because when Daniel Westbrook reviewed the transactions 2 days later, he went through 3 reports without pausing. Then he got to the 4th, and he sat very, very still. You're watching, and if you haven't subscribed yet, that's fine, but it costs nothing, and you clearly like stories like this. Hit that button and drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. Now, let's go. Let me tell you about Daniel Westbrook first. He was 44 years old and had been mayor of Harlow for 6 years. Not a career politician that was the thing people always said about him, and it was true. He'd come from business. Built a property development company from a single investment at 28, grown it across 3 cities, sold it at 37 for a number that still got cited in local business articles. Then he'd run for mayor on the platform of, I know how to make things actually work, and Harlow, tired of people who knew how to make speeches, had elected him. He was good at the job, genuinely. He was organized, decisive, and impatient with waste in the way that people who've built something from scratch are always impatient with waste. Under his tenure, 2 new roads had been completed on schedule, a first for Harlow in 12 years, and a community development plan that had been gathering dust since before he was born had actually been implemented. But the job had taken something from him too, or rather the years preceding it had. His marriage had ended 5 years ago, quietly, without drama, in the way that marriages end when 2 people have slowly become strangers while living in the same house. There had been no betrayal, no incident, just the accumulated weight of 2 people who had grown in different directions and one morning acknowledged it out loud. He had one son, Marcus, who was 14 and lived with his mother during the school term and with Daniel on weekends. Marcus was serious and funny and played chess competitively, which Daniel found both impressive and slightly confusing. He was a good father on the weekends he had. He was not always sure he was anything other than a function the rest of the time. The people in his life, the ones who called themselves close to him, were mostly useful. His chief of staff, Sandra, was brilliant and kept everything running. His deputy mayor, a man named Colin, was reliable if unimaginative. The women who circled his professional and social life were, by and large, attracted to the office, the profile, the story of a man who had made something of himself. Daniel was not naive about this. He had learned to recognize the specific quality of attention that came from people who wanted proximity to power rather than proximity to him. It was a certain brightness in the eyes that arrived before he'd said anything interesting activated by the title, not the person. He had been thinking about this for a while. The idea for the experiment had come to him at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, which was when most of his actual thinking happened. He had written it down before he went back to sleep, reviewed it in the morning, decided it was either very smart or slightly unhinged, and done it anyway. 4 women, 4 cards, no limit, 48 hours. Let them show him who they were, when the only constraint was their own character. He had the cards prepared through his private financial office, entirely separate from city funds, entirely his own money, which he wanted to be clear about to anyone who might later ask. He was not spending public money on his personal decisions. He was spending his own. The 3 women he had chosen were from his immediate social orbit. The first was Lauren, 38, beautiful in the way that receives consistent attention, and entirely comfortable with that attention. She worked in events management and moved through Harlow's professional social circuit with the ease of someone who had studied the room and memorized the names. She had been in Daniel's orbit for 8 months. She was warm and engaging and always perfectly presented. She had, on 2 occasions, allowed him to overhear her describing his house as our kind of space to a friend on the phone. He had filed that. The second was Christine, 41, finance background, currently running her own investment consultancy out of a glass office in the city center. She was sharp and composed and had a way of asking questions that made you feel like you were being gently interviewed. Daniel respected her intelligence genuinely. He was less certain about what she wanted from him versus what she wanted from his profile, his connections, his reach in the city. The third was Becca, 32, loud in the best and occasionally exhausting way. A graphic designer with 300,000 followers on social media and an aesthetic so consistent it looked like a brand because it was. Becca was fun, and Becca was genuinely funny. And Becca was also, Daniel had noticed, slightly different when a camera was pointed at her versus when there wasn't one. He had given the 3 cards to the 3 women at a dinner he hosted at his home on a Friday evening. He had explained the parameters simply. No limit, 48 hours, spend as they chose. He had not told them what he was looking for. That was the point. The 4th card sat on his desk all weekend because he had prepared 4 cards, but he only had 3 women. The 4th had been an impulse, a face he'd seen at a town hall meeting 2 weeks prior, a young woman who had stood up during the public comment section and asked a question about the community health center's reduced hours that was so precise, so genuinely informed, that Daniel had asked his chief of staff afterward who she was. Sandra had looked into it. Ruth Hayward, 26. Worked 2 jobs, mornings at the public library, evenings at a care home on the east side. No social media presence. Rented a flat above a hardware store. Born in Harlow, educated in Harlow, returned to Harlow after a single year at university when her mother's health declined. Had been quietly, apparently, attending every single town hall meeting for 4 years without once being recognized for it. The town called her the strange one, the quiet one who didn't socialize at the right events, or dress at the right level, or belong to the right circles. Not poor exactly, but visibly not part of the layer of Harlow that organized itself around image. Daniel had decided to include her on impulse, and then second-guessed himself twice, and then decided again. He never got the chance to deliver the card, because on Saturday morning, Lauren dropped hers. Lauren had started at 8 in the morning. Not because she was an early riser, she was not, but because the boutique she had her eye on opened at 9, and she wanted to be first in. She'd spent Friday evening reviewing her list. It was 12 items long. Each item had a location, a price estimate, and a note on which pieces photographed best. She was in a car by 7:45, on the phone with her friend Carly, talking through the day's plan. She dropped the card outside the boutique's side entrance while she was rummaging for her sunglasses with her right hand and her phone with her left. It fell from the outer pocket of her bag without sound, landing face down on the pavement. She did not notice. She went in. She came out 2 hours later with 4 bags and $7,000 spent, and got directly into the car that was waiting for her. The card stayed on the pavement. Ruth found it at 9:47. She was walking to the library. Her Saturday morning shift started at 10, taking the longer route because she liked the market stalls that set up on Granger Street on weekends. She passed the boutique, glanced down the side entrance out of habit the way you glance at things you're not interested in, and saw the small rectangle of black card on the ground. She picked it up. Read the front. Daniel Westbrook. The embossed lettering. The card type, she recognized it. The kind that didn't have a visible limit printed anywhere. She stood there for a moment. She knew who Daniel Westbrook was. Of course she did. She'd been attending his town halls for 4 years. She'd asked him a question 2 weeks ago about the health center's hours, and he hadn't given a satisfying answer, which had mildly irritated her. She looked at the card again. She could hand it in. To the boutique, They might be able to trace who dropped it to the council offices, to a police station. She could also, theoretically, do nothing at all with it. She thought about the health center, the reduced hours, the Eastern District waiting list, the community garden project that had been approved 2 years ago and still hadn't received its funding allocation, the library's heating system, which had been broken since November and which the council kept promising to repair and hadn't. She stood on the pavement outside the boutique for 4 minutes. Then she went to her shift at the library, clocked in, and spent the first 2 hours of her Saturday morning thinking. By noon, she had a plan. Lauren, meanwhile, had moved on to a furniture showroom. She spent $40,000 on a dining set, 2 armchairs, and a statement mirror that she photographed 17 times from different angles before buying. She arranged delivery to her flat, which did not have a dining room large enough for the table she purchased, but which she intended, the way she intended many things, to resolve at a later date. Christine had taken a different approach. She'd gone directly to her broker. Real estate investment, she'd decided, was the cleanest use of an unlimited card in 48 hours. She had researched 3 properties before the weekend and moved on her first choice by 10 that morning, a commercial unit in a district that was quietly increasing in value. She was smart. The investment was genuinely intelligent. By the time Daniel reviewed the transaction log, she would have turned his money into an asset generating monthly returns. She knew he would recognize this. She also knew, and she was too honest with herself to pretend otherwise, that recognition had been precisely what she was going for. Becca had documented everything. Not just photographed, documented. A running story across her social media platforms of a mystery luxury weekend that stopped just short of revealing the source of the funds. She bought clothes, experiences, a spa day, a one-night hotel stay. She also bought things for her friends, photographed them in the hotel suite, turned the whole thing into content that generated 11,000 new followers across the weekend. She was fun. She was genuinely fun. And she genuinely did spend part of the money on other people. But the camera was always running. And Daniel, when he reviewed her reports, would notice that the gifts she gave were always given in frame. Quick pause, you're deep into this story and still here. Love that. If you haven't subscribed, literally 2 seconds, and drop a comment. Where in the world are you right now? Watching from Lagos, London, Toronto, Manila? I see you. Now back to Ruth. Ruth left the library at 6. She had spent her shift making a list on the back of a scrap of paper she found in the staff room. Not a shopping list, a priorities list. Things she knew about Harlow's East Side that weren't getting fixed. She organized them by urgency, by cost estimate, by what she knew about each situation from 4 years of paying attention. The list had 9 items on it. She started with the one that bothered her most. The Harlow East Community Health Center had reduced its hours 18 months ago due to a budget shortfall. What had been a 6-day-a-week service now operated 3 days a week, which meant the waiting list for non-emergency appointments had stretched to 11 weeks. Ruth knew this because she had helped 3 separate elderly residents at the care home navigate the system. She had sat with them in waiting rooms. She had heard what 11 weeks meant when you were 73 and in pain and didn't have a car. She walked to the health center on Saturday afternoon. She spoke to the center manager, a harassed and clearly exhausted woman named Dr. Patricia Wells, who looked at Ruth the way someone looks at an unexpected visitor when they've run out of the energy to be suspicious. "I want to know what it would cost," Ruth said, "to restore your operating hours for the next 6 months, and what equipment you've had to defer purchasing." Dr. Wells stared at her. "Are you from the council?" "No." "A journalist?" "No, I just want to know." Dr. Wells studied her for a long moment. Then she said, "Come in." They sat in the small office for an hour. Ruth took notes. When Dr. Wells finished, Ruth looked at the total she had written down. She paid it before she left. She asked for no recognition, no plaque, no announcement, no press release. "Just restore the hours," she said. "That's all I need." Dr. Wells looked like she might cry. "Who are you?" she said. "Someone who lives in this city," Ruth said. Same as you. She went to the library, next her library, not to work, to talk to her manager, a man named Gerald, who had been trying for 2 years to fund a community literacy program for adults. The funding had been applied for, reviewed, partially approved, then quietly defunded in a budget adjustment nobody had properly announced. Gerald had told Ruth about it in November, sitting in the staff room over bad coffee, with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been trying to do something good through official channels for so long they can no longer tell whether they're making progress or just moving in circles. Ruth paid for the program, 12 months, fully funded. Gerald stared at the transaction confirmation on his screen for 30 seconds without speaking. "Ruth," he finally said. "Don't make it a big thing," she said. "Just run the program." She moved through the evening with her list. The community garden on Vale Street, approved 2 years ago, stalled on a funding allocation that nobody had officially canceled, but nobody had released either. Ruth found the project coordinator, a woman named Angela, who ran it from her kitchen table and funded the full first phase. Planting infrastructure, a storage shed, basic tools, soil amendment for the first growing season. Angela read the payment confirmation and then sat down on her kitchen chair slowly and said nothing for a moment. "Did the council send you?" she finally asked. "No," Ruth said. "Then who?" Ruth smiled. "It doesn't matter who sent me. The garden matters." The playground equipment in the Harlow East Park, 2 of the 3 pieces, had been cordoned off since a safety inspection 18 months ago. The council had the inspection report. They did not have the repair budget. Ruth had the repair budget now. She called the maintenance company directly, arranged the repair for the following week, and paid the deposit before she got off the phone. The heating in the public library, her library, she had already decided about this. She asked Gerald for the quote he'd been given in December. He produced it from a file he clearly had never stopped keeping. She paid it. By 10 o'clock on Saturday night, Ruth had been to 6 locations. She sat on a bench in Vale Street, the community garden's future home, currently an overgrown patch of ground behind a chain-link fence, and looked at her list. 4 items done, 5 remaining. She had used a significant portion of the card. She checked the remaining balance through the transaction receipts she'd collected. There was still money. She thought about what else she knew. What else had been waiting? She thought about the children's reading corner at the library that had been proposed 3 years ago and never funded, the after-school program at the East Side Primary School that had been cut, the small shelter on Briar Street run by a woman named Meg, who had been operating on donated tins and second-hand blankets since the council had restructured its support allocation. She went to Meg first. It was late. She called ahead. Meg answered on the first ring, which told Ruth something about how often Meg slept. She funded the shelter's operating costs for 4 months. She paid for a supply restock that put Meg in tears, so immediate and complete that Ruth sat with her for 20 minutes just to make sure she was okay. "I've been doing this alone for 18 months, Meg said, wiping her face with the sleeve of her jumper. "I kept thinking someone would notice. I kept thinking the council would. I don't know. See it. They should have," Ruth said. "I'm sorry they didn't." She went home at midnight. She sat at her small kitchen table in the flat above the hardware store and looked at the card. She had kept nothing for herself. Not a single transaction on that card was for Ruth Hayward. She thought about this. She knew she could have. There was still a balance remaining. Still time on the clock. She could fix her heating, which had been unreliable since October. She could replace the coat she'd been wearing for 4 winters. She could pay the 3 months of student loan arrears that sat in the back of her mind like a persistent headache. She looked at the card. Then she put it in an envelope, wrote Mayor Daniel Westbrook, found on Granger Street Saturday, 9:47 a.m. on the front, in her careful handwriting, sealed it, and put it by the door to drop at the council offices on Monday morning. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep immediately. She lay in the dark and thought about what she'd done, and felt something that was not triumph and not pride exactly, but something quieter and more durable than either. Like things were slightly more right than they had been that morning. like the city was a fraction closer to what it should be. She thought about the health center's hours being restored, about the garden, about the children who would climb on fixed playground equipment without anyone knowing someone had cared enough to make that happen. That was enough. That was more than enough. She slept. Daniel reviewed the reports on Monday morning. Sandra had compiled them over the weekend. 4 files, 1 per card. She had placed them on his desk in the order they had come in, neatest first. He read Lauren's file: jewelry, furniture, personal styling, a reservation at a restaurant she frequented that he'd paid for through the card without her seeming to register the overlap. He turned the pages. The number at the bottom was large, and every line item was personal. He read Christine's file: sharp, strategic, exactly what he'd expected from her. Investment properties, stocks, money making money. He had been right that she would impress him. He had also been right about what it said. He read Becca's file: shopping, hotels, friends' gifts, social content. He paused at the gifts she had genuinely spent on other people. He noted that. He also noted the content angle. Everything documented. Everything framed. He picked up the 4th file. Sandra had placed it last. He would later wonder whether Sandra had already read it and arranged them in that order deliberately. Sandra was capable of that kind of quiet orchestration. The header read, "Card recovered Granger Street Saturday, 9:47 a.m. He frowned. He turned to the first transaction. Community Health Center, East, operating budget restoration, 6 months. He sat back slightly. Second transaction, Harlow Public Library Adult Literacy Program, 12-month funding. He was very still. He kept reading. Community garden, playground equipment, library heating, children's reading corner, after-school program, Briar Street, shelter, 4 months operating costs, plus supply restock. No clothing, no restaurants, no personal purchases, not one. He turned to the last page. The card had been returned. He had found it on his desk when he arrived that morning in an envelope with his name written on the front in handwriting he didn't recognize. Sandra had told him it had been dropped in the council office letterbox over the weekend. He read the note inside the envelope again. Found on Granger Street, Saturday, 9:47 a.m. That was it. No name, no explanation, no request for recognition. Daniel sat with the file open in front of him for a long time. Then he pressed the intercom on his desk. Sandra. Yes? The 4th card. We have no name on this. A pause that lasted slightly too long to be neutral. No, Sandra said. We don't. Find out who it was. Another pause. Already working on it, Sandra said. Sandra found Ruth in 40 minutes. The transaction at the health center had required a name to process, and Dr. Wells, when Sandra called, gave it immediately, with the particular enthusiasm of someone who had been hoping someone would ask. Ruth Hayward, Dr. Wells said. She came in on Saturday. She sat in my office for an hour and asked me every question I've been wanting someone official to ask for 18 months. And then she fixed it. Just fixed it. Sandra thanked her, made 3 more calls to confirm, then walked to Daniel's office with her notepad. Ruth Hayward, she said. 26. Library worker. Care home evenings. Lives on Archer Street. The flat above Henley's Hardware. She found the card, Daniel said. Apparently, Lauren dropped it outside the boutique. Daniel was quiet for a moment. She found an unlimited credit card, he said slowly, and spent 48 hours using it on the city. That's what the transactions show. He leaned back. Did she keep anything for herself? Sandra looked at the file in her hand. Nothing, she said. Not a thing. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. Ruth got the call at 3 on Monday afternoon. She was reshelving returns at the library when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Miss Hayward. Yes? This is Sandra Park, Chief of Staff to Mayor Westbrook. He'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning if you're available. 9 o'clock at the council offices. Ruth stood in the aisle between the history section and local interest, a stack of books under one arm. "Is this about the card?" she said. "Yes." A pause. "Am I in trouble?" A pause on Sandra's end. Then, with a quality that Ruth thought might have been a suppressed smile, "No, Miss Hayward, you are very much not in trouble." She arrived at 9. Sandra met her at the entrance and walked her through the council offices, a journey that required passing through 2 waiting areas and a corridor lined with professional photographs of various city officials, none of whom appeared to be having any fun, and into Daniel's office. He was standing when she came in. That surprised her. She had expected him to be behind the desk, in the way that people behind desks established territory. He was standing by the window, looking out over the square below. He turned when she entered. She had seen him at town halls before, but always from the audience at a distance. Up close, he looked like a man who was more tired than his public photographs suggested, and more genuine than his professional reputation implied. He had the specific quality of someone who had been managing their presentation for so long that a moment of lapsed performance, just standing by a window like a normal person, felt almost disorienting. "Miss Hayward," he said, "thank you for coming." "You asked me to," she said, which was perhaps more direct than the occasion called for. But Ruth was a direct person and didn't particularly know how to be otherwise. Something moved across his face. Not offense. Something closer to relief. "Sit down," he said. "Please." They sat. He had the file on the desk between them, but he didn't open it. He looked at her directly. "The card wasn't meant for you," he said. "I know," she said. "I was going to return it. I did return it. After you spent 48 hours using it." "Yes." "On the city." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" Ruth looked at him. She thought about how to answer honestly, without making it sound like a performance, which was the thing she was most afraid of it sounding like. "Because I go to your town halls," she said. "I've been going for 4 years. And I sit there and I listen to the budget discussions and the priority reviews, and I know what's falling through the gaps because I work in the parts of the city where the gaps are. And I found a card that could fix some of those gaps, and I had 48 hours and a list." Daniel looked at her. "You had a list," he said. "I always have a list," she said. "I've been making it for 4 years. I just never had a way to do anything about it." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The health center's hours, the garden, the shelter. How long have you known about those?" "The health center, since they cut the hours. I have 3 residents at the care home where I work who couldn't get appointments for 3 months. I watched what that cost them." She looked at him. "You approved the hour reduction in the budget review." "I did. It was a mistake." He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said, "it was." She hadn't expected that. The directness of it. Most politicians, in her experience of watching them from the audience, didn't say, "Yes, it was a mistake," with that particular clean finality. "The garden project," he said. "We stalled the funding allocation for 2 years." "Yes. Angela has been running that project from her kitchen table." "I know that now." He looked at the file. "I didn't know that before." Ruth said nothing. "That's the problem," he said, almost to himself. "I approve things from reports, and the reports don't always tell me what's actually happening on the ground." He looked at her. "You know what's actually happening." "I know the East Side," she said. "I've lived there my whole life." He nodded slowly. "Miss Hayward," he said, "what's on the rest of your list?" She blinked. "The list you didn't finish," he said. "You had 9 items. I counted the transactions. You did 7. She looked at him. "What are the other 2?" he said. She told him, and he listened. Not in the way that officials listened at town halls with the specific, attentive blankness of someone waiting for the speaker to finish. He actually listened. He wrote things down. He asked follow-up questions. He pushed back on one item, the youth sports facility, which he thought the existing park could absorb with modification rather than requiring a new build. And she pushed back on his pushback with 3 specific reasons. And after a pause, He conceded 2 of them and held one. And it was, Ruth thought, the most functional conversation she'd had in 4 years of attending meetings, where conversations like this were supposed to happen. When they finished, he sat back and looked at her with an expression that was difficult to categorize. "You found a card that wasn't yours," he said. "You could have bought anything. You could have bought nothing and returned it immediately. Instead, you spent 48 hours trying to fix the city." He paused. "And then you returned what was left." "It wasn't mine," Ruth said simply. "No," he said, "but what you did with it was." She looked at him. "I want to offer you a role," he said. "Not a large title, not an official position, not right away, but a role working directly with my office on East Side Community Liaison, taking what you know about what's actually happening and making sure our decision-making reflects it." He paused. "That list you've been making for 4 years, I want to work through it properly." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "The health center hours," she said. "They stay restored. They stay restored. The garden gets its full allocation. Done. The shelter. Meg needs consistent support, not one-time funding. I'll have Sandra set up a proper support structure." Ruth looked at him. "Okay," she said. "Still watching Love That. If you're not subscribed yet, you know what to do. Free 2 seconds, and the next story might be even better than this one. Also, drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Tell me." The 3 women found out about Ruth the way most things in a small city find out about themselves, through the particular efficient grapevine of people who pay attention to official announcements. The council press release was brief and not particularly dramatic. Community Engagement Initiative. Mayor Westbrook announces new Eastside Community Liaison role. Ruth's name was in it. Lauren saw it on her phone during breakfast and read it twice. She thought about the card she'd dropped. She thought about the boutique. She thought about the dining table that had been delivered to her flat and was currently positioned at an angle because the room wasn't quite the right shape for it. She did not comment publicly on any of this. Christine read the release in her office and sat with it for a moment. She was too precise a thinker to miss what it implied. She had played the smartest game available with the card she'd been given. She had made the money grow. She had demonstrated strategic intelligence. And a woman who had found a card on the pavement and spent it on a community garden had landed differently. She sat with that for a long time. She did not say anything publicly either. But that evening she called a charity she had been meaning to donate to for 3 years and set up a recurring monthly contribution. Nobody knew she did this. She didn't tell anyone. It was the most privately honest thing she had done in a while. Becca's followers inevitably found the press release. Several of them posted it in her comments under her weekend content. The juxtaposition was not kind luxury hotel room versus community health center. Becca didn't delete the comments. She didn't respond to them either. She sat with her phone in her apartment for a long time. Then she posted something she had not photographed or styled or planned. Sometimes the most interesting story isn't the one you were telling. That was all. No explanation, no follow-up content. It was the most engagement she'd gotten in 6 months. Daniel and Ruth's working relationship developed the way real things develop, with the friction and honesty of 2 people who disagree on specifics while agreeing on what actually matters. She attended meetings she'd previously only observed from the public gallery. She compiled reports that looked nothing like the official reports because they were built from things you learned by sitting with people in their kitchens and their waiting rooms and their staff rooms over bad coffee. He read every single one. He pushed back on things. She pushed back on his pushbacks. Sandra watched this process with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen for a long time and is quietly gratified to see it arrive. The East Side changed. Not overnight. Nothing real changes overnight, but incrementally in the way that matters. The health center expanded. The garden grew. The literacy program ran its first cohort, and Gerald sent Ruth a photograph of 22 adults holding the books they'd read together, and she kept it on her desk. The shelter on Briar Street got its proper support structure. Meg sent Ruth a card at Christmas with a handwritten note that said simply, "You saw us. Thank you." On a Saturday, 11 months after Ruth had found a credit card on the pavement outside a boutique, she and Daniel walked through the Vale Street community garden. It was October, and the first growing season had just finished. Angela was there with a group of volunteers putting the beds to rest for winter. Someone had planted sunflowers along the fence line that had gone to seed, standing tall and finished and completely right. Ruth stopped at the fence and looked at them. Daniel stopped beside her. "That was on your list," he said. "At the bottom," she said. "It wasn't urgent." "No," he said, "but it's beautiful." She looked at the garden, at the children from the neighboring streets who had shown up this morning to help Angela with the beds, at the elderly man in the corner who came every Saturday and had been teaching anyone who asked about seasonal planting. She thought about 4 years of making a list from the audience, 4 years of watching and waiting and knowing what was wrong and not having the means to change it. She thought about a card lying on a pavement on a Saturday morning. She thought about the moment she picked it up and the moment she chose what to do with it. The simplest choice, really, when she looked at it honestly. Not heroic, not complicated. Just here is something that can help. Here is a list. Here is a city that is trying. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes," Daniel said. "The original experiment, the 4 cards. What were you actually looking for?" He was quiet for a moment. "I told myself I was testing character," he said. "I think the honest answer is that I was looking for someone who saw the city the way I used to see it, before the job made it administrative." He paused. "Before I started reading reports instead of walking the streets." She looked at him. "And?" He looked back at her. "I found her," he said, "on a pavement on Granger Street. Here's the thing I want to leave you with tonight." Ruth never asked for the card. It wasn't meant for her. She found it. She had 48 hours and no limits. She could have kept every transaction for herself, and nobody would have blamed her. She didn't spend a single dollar on herself. So here's my question. Do you think what Ruth did was extraordinary, or do you think it should be ordinary? And the only reason it feels remarkable is because we're so used to people choosing themselves. Tell me in the comments. Honest answers only. And drop where you're watching from. I read every single one. London, Houston, Lagos, Cape Town? Say it below. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you've been here 20 minutes and still haven't subscribed, it's free. It's 2 seconds. And the next story is already coming. See you there.